The Constitution of the United States has proven to be among the most durable governing documents in world history. What the founders created in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 was described by George Washington, the man who presided over the proceedings, as nothing short of a miracle. And the man who had more to do with the creation of the Constitution than any other was James Madison of Virginia. He has been described as the father of the Constitution. At least, at a bare minimum, he could be called a key architect of our nation's governing document.
I think that George Washington probably was the most decent American that we've ever had. He was a very successful general, and he was just a decent person. And after the war, they wanted to make him king. And he said, no, we did not fight a war to have a monarchy. James Madison would come in, I think, a clear second as another decent American and the father, essentially the father of the United States Constitution.
James Madison of Virginia was born in 1751. Surprisingly, as a Virginian, he chose to attend Princeton, not William and Mary. After graduating Princeton, Madison stayed on an extra year, studying how to translate the Bible into English and back into Hebrew and Greek.
Mr. Madison was sent to Princeton College, perhaps through fear of the skeptical principles then so prevalent at William and Mary. During his stay at Princeton, a great revival took place, and it was believed that he partook of its spirit. On his return home, he conducted worship in his father's house. He soon after offered for the legislature, and it was objected to him by his opponents that he was better suited to the pulpit than to the legislative hall. Bishop Meade.
But Madison's ministry, if it could be called that, was in the political realm. He lost his first election to a statewide office because his opponent provided little bottles of alcohol for those who would vote for him. But Madison ran again later and won, and he served on a committee in 1776 that framed a Bill of Rights for the state of Virginia. Madison insisted on religious liberty, not mere tolerance, in that document. This was something he had learned well from his main teacher at Princeton, the president of the school, the Reverend Dr. John Witherspoon, a devout Presbyterian who came from Scotland. Some scholars note that Witherspoon is perhaps best known as the Founding Father, who as an educator trained many of the Founding Fathers. Madison returned to Virginia, where he became an attorney. He befriended Thomas Jefferson, a kindred spirit, and worked with him. Together, they worked to safeguard religious freedom. They were heroes to the evangelicals of their day, such as the Baptists, who were punished by the officials in Virginia for preaching without a license they could not obtain because they were Baptists by choice and not members of the Church of England. Madison was a key player at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, and a key player also to get it ratified. After the Constitution was written, the founders had to convince the various states to adopt it. New York was reticent, and so under the pseudonym Publius, letters were sent to the editors of newspapers throughout the state. These essays came to be known as the Federalist Papers.
The Federalist Papers were authored by three primary lawyers, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. And they promoted the ratification of the U.S. Constitution as a Federalist concept. And so what that means is that we understand that the federal government is required for preservation of the Union, but that the founders recognized that state government and state sovereignty was important and had to be close to the people, but also a third tier, that of self-governance. And so when we look at the 9th and 10th Amendments that were ultimately ratified as part of our Bill of Rights, we see that we have specific limited powers given to our federal governments, our state governments, and that any powers not given to those two branches are reserved to we the people.
The founders did intend for us to have a limited government. They only gave Congress limited powers, and those are enumerated in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. The government should not interfere with people's existence as long as they engage in peaceable behavior.
Madison's thoughts on government, heavily influenced by Reverend Witherspoon, began with the premise that man is sinful. Good government should protect us from our fellow man and from government itself.
Christianity and the depravity of human nature underlay the whole American experiment and the separation of powers. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, wrote this in probably the most famous of the Federalist Papers, which was Federalist number 51. He wrote, "Ambition must be meant to counteract ambition. If men were angels, no government would be necessary."
If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. James Madison.
Woven throughout our founding fathers was this notion of the depravity of man.
The founders did not believe in the goodness of mankind. That is, they said men were not angels, and this is why we need government.
Indeed, James Madison and the other founders began with a biblical premise that man is basically sinful and built the Constitution on that foundation.
19th century British Prime Minister Sir William Gladstone once remarked, quote, "The American Constitution is, so far as I can see, the most wonderful work ever struck off at a given time by the brain and purpose of man," end quote. And James Madison deserves our thanks for his tireless efforts to help get the Constitution written and adapted. When he was president on July 23, 1813, Madison called for a day of prayer, not his first nor his last, in which he said of God, quote, "He has blessed the United States with a political constitution founded on the will and authority of the whole people, and guaranteeing to each individual security not only of his person and his property, but of those sacred rights of conscience so essential to his present happiness and so dear to his future hopes," end quote. America was given birth by men like Madison with a biblical worldview. For Providence Forum, I'm Dr. Jerry Newcomb.